Hi there, it's the second Sunday of Easter, and I thought I'd share a video reflection on the scripture readings that have been suggested for churches to read today. But before reading the scriptures, just want to take a moment to notice how we are as we're approaching the scriptures. And if you find it helpful for your concentration, you might want to close your eyes. And just take a moment to notice what's on your mind, the thoughts and the ideas that you're carrying there. And take some time to notice what's on your heart, feelings and emotions that sit there. And take time to notice what you're feeling in the whole of your body. All of this might have something to say to us as we're approaching Scripture and interpreting Scripture. The readings for today are both from the New Testament. The first one is from the first epistle of John, so 1 John, chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 2, verse 2. And the Gospel reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verse 19 to 31. So pause the video, have a read of those, and then start the video up again. The epistle that we read, it opens by saying, "We have seen and heard and touched the word of life." Now we think that this letter was actually written a very long time after the time of Jesus. It seems like it was written around the year 100. So this is not being written by the author of John's Gospel, and it isn't being written by the same John who wrote Revelation either. It seems like it was probably written in the area that's now part of Turkey, maybe the city of Ephesus. But the question is, how can they say that they're reporting what they've seen and heard and touched themselves all that time after the time of Jesus? Given that most people in that part of the world at that time only lived for 20 or 30 years, it's unlikely that the author was around at the time of Christ. What they're saying is that God has revealed things to them. God has shone a light on things for them and allowed them to see what they are about to reveal in the letter. Now, this is a challenge to the way that these people were seen by their Greek-cultured neighbours. The Macedonian Greek rulers who had controlled the world for several generations back had seen their culture's way of thinking and living as enlightened, and they saw the other peoples of the world as primitive peoples. They called them barbarians, and that meant people who didn't speak Greek, people who needed to be civilized by Greek-speaking, Greek-thinking people. So Jewish people were seen by Greek-cultured people as backward and unenlightened, walking in the shadows of the world. Later on, when the Romans took over control, they adopted a lot of the culture and religion and attitudes of their Macedonian Greek predecessors. And so the Romans saw themselves and the Greeks as the enlightened, cultured, advanced peoples, and they saw Jewish people and many other peoples around them as backward and primitive and simple. And when Christians began to appear, they saw Christians in the same way, and they ridiculed them for being simple. It is a lot like the way that those of us from a British culture have often seen the rest of the world. The author of this letter, a Christian, is saying, we have become enlightened because of what God has shown to us. God has lit things up for us so that we can see clearly. They're refuting the things that are said about them by their Greek and Roman neighbours, and they're doing it in a humble way, saying that they're only enlightened because of what God has revealed to them. The author talks about the nature of sin and speaks quite strongly, says some things that are not polite in our society, that might upset us because they're hard to hear. If we're enlightened by God's light, that should mean that we can see ourselves as we are. It should mean that we can change things about ourselves that are sick or sinful It should mean that we can live honest and honourable lives. But we often find it hard to see ourselves that way, don't we? We avoid seeing the things about ourselves that make us feel uncomfortable or ashamed, even though seeing those aspects of ourselves clearly might help us to change and heal so that we can live well. We do often struggle to see our sinfulness despite the light of God. And so we have to have humility in what we're saying and doing. We know that we're still in a process of turning around and changing, and we're still in a process of being redeemed. And in the meantime, Christ is patient with us. Christ is speaking up for us. Christ sees how we could be and vouches for us as though we were like that already. Christ is taking responsibility for our failing. Christ is wearing the cost of our sin. In the gospel reading, we also have talk about seeing and touching, witnessing material evidence of what God has done. It says that Jesus shows them the wounds of his execution, which remain with his resurrected body. His body is still marked by trauma. The disciples have seen the executed and resurrected Christ, and so they've believed. But Thomas has been absent when Christ has appeared, and he says he wants to see as well, and that he even wants to touch Christ's wounds so that he knows that it really is the resurrected Christ. It's quite a shocking thing to say. When the resurrected Christ returns later and challenges Thomas to touch and feel his wounds that have been inflicted by the violence of humanity, we don't know whether Thomas is game enough to actually touch and feel Christ's wounds. It seems that seeing is enough after all. Seeing prompts Thomas to worship Christ, calling him my Lord and my God. We've often heard Thomas criticised because he needed to see in order to believe. But actually, all of the other disciples in the story also needed to see to believe. They believed because they had seen the resurrected Christ. When Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe," he's speaking a blessing on the people who will come later on, people who are not there for that experience, people who heard about it from a preacher or who heard it read out from an epistle or from a gospel like we have today. But it may be difficult for us who have not seen the resurrected Christ, if we're the kind of people who need to see and feel for ourselves. But I'd like to suggest that we do have evidence of this if we spend some more time reflecting on the story and on our own story as a country. The resurrection of Christ is not the only remarkable, unbelievable element in the story. Another shocking thing is that Christ is proclaiming forgiveness. Jesus, a colonized person, a victim of state violence, still bearing the marks of his execution, comes calling for forgiveness, giving his friends the authority to forgive sins or not to. When Thomas said that he did not believe, I wonder which part he did not believe more, the resurrection part or the part where the victim of state violence was preaching forgiveness. We may not have the corporeal Jesus of the first century in the room with us proclaiming forgiveness and asking us to touch his wounds, but we do have something like it. In 1988, we, as the colonist migrant members of the Uniting Church, which is the church that I'm from, we were invited into covenant with the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress, which is the Indigenous part of the same church. They were inviting us to walk with them, and it took us a while to accept that offer. We didn't accept that offer until 1994. But that was an offer of forgiveness from First Peoples for the harm that we've caused to them. For a number of years, I had the privilege of being able to spend some time with First Peoples, sharing our home in Carlton sharing cups of tea, sharing meals, sharing stories, hearing about the wounds and about the recovery, about the new life. What we were being offered in all of that sharing was forgiveness. The question is, can we believe it? Can we believe that First Peoples might offer us forgiveness and might lead us in a new way, might help us to change direction? That's tangible evidence of what the risen Christ is talking about. We're still being invited to walk with First Peoples. A lot of the time, I think that it can be hard for us who are colonist and migrant people to know how to respond. Something that I found helpful that the Synod, the Uniting Church Synod for Victoria and Tasmania, created a few years ago was a covenanting guide, which is to help people from colonist and migrant backgrounds to think about what it means to covenant, what it means to walk with First Peoples in this place. So if that's of interest, I would be interested in having a look at that with people. If there are people who are interested in having a look at that, either online or somewhere in the southeast of the city, please let me know. Let me know in the comments or send me a message. I know that there's definitely other people around that are interested in that, and it'd be good for us to get together. Yeah, I know that there's people around who are interested in this, and it might be something we can do together. The question is, can we believe it? Resurrection, forgiveness, walking together, all of these things are happening, and we're invited to get involved. Let's take a moment to consider what God's Spirit might be saying to us in this time and place.